fasted. It was like a retreat. So some people fast, some people don't, but everybody's there to further their inner life. And you asked if I meditated, if I was interested in meditation. And what happened was when I was 15 years old, I had been raised Catholic, and neither my mother nor my father were Americans. I'm first generation American. And so they were kind of from another world. They weren't modern in certain ways. And so my mother, who had been raised in an old, in Ireland with the nuns and the priests and the sort of a almost medieval kind of religion, well, her desire to raise us that way was a front. And my father, he became a converted Catholic, so he was real extreme into Catholicism. And he's written several books. He wrote several books about saints, Sir Thomas More, and about the popes, pageant of the popes. And so we had little shrines in different parts of our house where you could just stop, kneel down, and say a prayer, almost like a church. And my father's friends were priests, his best friends. And so the religion played a large role, and it was kind of an old-fashioned religion. And that sort of set a ball rolling. So by the time I was 15, my father, you'll read how my mother came, which is very magical, how she came to America. How it happened for her, but also how she knew she was going to come. But what happened was when I was 15, my father died, the week after I turned 15. And I was actually playing hooky from school when he died. A friend of mine and her mother had a place outside LA, in Wrightwood, in the mountains outside LA, where you could have snow and things. And we were there. And so I didn't call home. He died sometime during the night of the Saturday night. And I didn't call home. No one knew how to get in touch with me. And from my side, I was thinking I'll wait as long as possible to call home. And then when I call, I'll just say to my father, sorry, it's too late. I can't possibly make it home. And so that way I won't have to go to school tomorrow. And so I called home, and my brother, who was an interesting, very much a sort of pre-60s person, kind of beatnik type, he answered the phone. And I said, let me talk to Dad. He said, Dad's dead. And I said, you're kidding. He said, look, just face it, Dad's dead. And I took the phone. We were in a restaurant. I took the phone and I threw it up in the air. I wasn't thinking clearly. And everybody realized what happened over that phone call. And I went back to the house we were staying in. And that evening, all I could think about was, what does this mean? That, that somebody can be gone forever. What does that mean? What have I just gone through? What's going on? And I sat on the bed, and there were beautiful mountains. It's in the desert, but up in the mountains. And I began to feel this peace. And it grew. And it grew stronger and stronger until it became overwhelming. And during that time that it was growing, I was receding through time, back through my birth. And I felt, a sense of, with this peace, a connectedness with people I'd known in other lifetimes, people I knew, aunts and uncles who, I'd never met or known or knew their names. I suddenly knew them all. I was visiting with all of them at the same time, but individually. But it continued to grow, and I began to feel a unity and a kind of collective consciousness to all of these different elements being part of one. And that became so strong, I felt the presence of what I'd always thought was God. It was familiar, it had been there all along in different sort of forms. As a mother, as a father, I related to sort of their archetypes. But here in this experience, I saw it all. I went through time, saw myself through as my consciousness had evolved, and went back to this state. And it was so strong, it just kind of whitewashed everything in my life. I mean, nothing seemed that important anymore. Sort of like when you taste honey, you can't taste anything for a while. I couldn't get excited about things. I was just stunned. Now, some people have these experiences and they become more enlightened. Well, I'll tell you right now, I did not become more enlightened. But I felt something, saw something, met something that was very familiar, that I knew, that was undeniable and extraordinarily profound. And so that really set something rolling in me. But now the 60s were beginning to roll then too. And there was a lot going on in the 60s that had never happened to a culture in mass. And back then, the difference was that we had, 3 or 4 television stations. We had this, some radio stations. We all went through everything together. We didn't have the palette that people have now of all these different things with the web. You can be fragmented in a way that we didn't have. So it was, what happened as I was coming of age was a time where a lot of us, as we became adults, questioned where are we going? What are we doing? Because we were waiting for the Third World War. Do you remember that? I mean, that was right on the horizon. It could happen anytime. We even practiced for it. We had monthly air raids. So we had that. We lost hope when John F. Kennedy was killed before our eyes. We all went through that together. And then we had the Vietnam War, which, there weren't heroes in. I mean, people were forced to go to war, and 50,000 or more died. And the war wasn't something that everybody was behind automatically. There were no real good guys. In fact, a lot of the leaders of the time weren't even sure if we were supposed to be going there. So you had all this confusion that came like a tsunami to a group of people coming of age, questioning who they were, what we were entering, and what we were about. And not to forget, there was LSD and all those things entered the culture. And so it was a time of really shaking the foundations of our consciousness, asking the questions, blowing our minds with LSD, peyote, mescaline, all psilocybin. I mean, we were all just not knowing where we were going, trying to understand reality that it wasn't making sense to us. And it was a large collective amount of us. So that is the setting that drove the Beatles and myself to India. And I wish that I could remember the story that George told me about how he woke up. Mine was when my father died, but then I got into everything else with everybody else and barely made it out. But George said that he went to San Francisco to either listen to some musicians, it might have been the band or something, and they told that he got high, he got stoned, and I think it was mescaline. And it opened him up to a whole nother world. I think, now I'm teaching meditation everywhere, and a lot of the young people are doing what's called ayahuasca. Anyone heard of that? Yeah, so ayahuasca is also hallucinogenic coming out of South America. But the problem with all of these, which we found because we were dead serious about these things, they don't last. We wanted real change. If we were going to, tamper with our consciousness, let's make it real. Let's not fool around. I mean, we were really out there to make change. But the change was not visible. It was invisible. It was ourselves. And this is why I've been so gung-ho with meditation. You say meditation, TM, and there were times that TM became very sort of she in the late 70s, and it was embarrassing to me to be teaching it. Not really, but on one level is because that was never why I started it. It was never about that, but it became so fashionable. And then, it's gone through different evolutions as far, as it's sort of growing in our culture. But the main thing to see is that it's part of yoga. Now, yoga has entered the culture very nicely. And so is TM, but TM is an advancement of that. And let me explain that. What we found when we took these hallucinogenic drugs and when we questioned and looked inside was that there was more. There was much more to who we thought we were. That our destiny here is not about having so many children and having a job. I mean, certainly that's important. It's very important. I'm not denying that. But really, it's about growing. Because we're all creatures of life. Just like the flowers in the field. They're all life creatures, and they're all there for exactly the same reason, no matter how different they are, and that is to bloom. And our ability to bloom, and this is what we found back then, is much more than our culture gives credit to. We can bloom in ways that can make us wiser, bigger, more peaceful, happy human beings, more productive, less dysfunctional. And once you see that possibility, you have a responsibility, I think, to somehow tell others. It's hard to tell others. Unless they're interested, it's like, I don't know, they don't want to hear it. It's like me trying to tell my children about the real story. I say, kids, the real story behind Dear Prudence. Next thing I know, they've left the room. But the fact is, this world is extraordinarily precarious. And we know it at different points in times. We know that we're precarious, our existence. But we also know that when we go through an illness or there's a misfortune or something happens, if we come out on the other side so-called healthy, people will say things like, I really learned from that. I'm a better person because of that. I remember hearing Michael J. Fox in the mid-90s, after his career at that time was decimated. He lost everything when he had Parkinson's. And he came on some talk show and he said, when somebody said, well, what's it like? You've lost your job, nobody wants to hire you, you've lost your money, you've lost everything. He said it was the best thing that ever happened to me. So there's a part of us